All right, guys, welcome back to the Devori Darkin Show. An important guest on today episode, and it's particularly ones that I love to do because he would be considered an insider, a person who had a front row seat to what is actually happening, particularly in Congress. And we're talking about John Leganski. He was the former deputy chief of staff to the House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. He is a author of the book titled Glory, Grief, and the Gavel, which we'll talk about. He obviously spent years inside House Republican leadership, and I'd love to get his take about what actually happens behind closed doors that really the American people don't see. So, John, it is so good to have you here on the show, sir. Thank you. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, like I told you before we started, very grateful to get your inside take on things. And let's just start in the rearview mirror, meaning let's go back down memory lane. I think one of the most controversial things that happened was the ousting of Kevin McCarthy. So, could you just kind of tell the audience um, when during that time did you realize this was going to turn into something huge?
Yeah, yeah. Well, as you mentioned, it actually kind of started with the election of Kevin McCarthy. And that's what the book's all about. In some respects, I was with Kevin for 10 years. We ran for speaker in 2015. We did not get there that time. We took a lot of those lessons and applied them into 2023. And that turned into a 15 ballot election for speaker, which was the longest in a century and the longest since the Civil War that this country has seen. So I think that was kind of a foreshadowing that this was going to be a different Congress than most you'd been used to. Millions of viewers were watching. Some of your viewers, I'm sure, were watching. I had a Romanian legislator come up to me and say she recognized me from that voting. Even the Pope told Kevin that he and his staff were watching the ballots from the Vatican. So there was a little bit of a political endurance contest that happened in that January of 2023. And eventually it did come to a head. We had a group that, they weren't content with Kevin from the start and they never really got good. And they were able to, use the powers that be to remove Kevin. But it was certainly something to live through, and I hope viewers are able to learn from my experiences when they buy this book.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting you say that because in hindsight, I guess the question that's really important is, do they believe now that it was worth it, given how some of these people, some are not even serving in Congress today anymore, and then some of them are not even in the support of Trump and his administration now. How do you see it at the end of the day? Do you think it was the right call, or do you think everything happened the way that it was supposed to?
Yeah. Well, I've got a saying that, if you seek revenge, dig two graves, right? There was a group that did not like Kevin off the bat. They wanted to stop him in January. They weren't able to do it in January, but they were able to do it later on. And yet, as you mentioned, it led to a lot of their downfalls, right? Six of the eight members that voted Kevin out from the Republican Party are not going to be in Congress next year. Some of them had pretty dramatic downfalls. And so, again, I think when you're driven by vengeance, that is eventually going to catch up to you, and I do not think it was the right thing for the Congress. That said, Mike Johnson's done a great job as Speaker, and perhaps that's what the House needed was a face that could come in, be a fresh face, get what needed to get done. And I think Kevin realized that and said, "I'm not going to hold up the business of Congress for myself. I could sit here forever and just postpone this vote and stay in this Speaker's chair. That's not what's right." And we realized it wasn't a political or policy difference these guys had with us. It was a personality difference, and you just can't overcome that at a certain point. So he took his medicine, he fell on the sword for the party, and that's sometimes how it goes. That's the game we get into.
Yeah. So talk to us about the Speaker of the House, the power that the Speaker holds, and um, how do you know you have a Speaker who is really effective at their job? What are some indicators that the American people can kind of look towards to judge? Because there's a lot of rhetoric online, right, about Mike Johnson overall, the Congress. There's a lot of
Sure.
American people not feeling very high on Congress today. So, what are some things that they can look at to judge with clear eyes?
Yeah. Well, I think the two traits that make for a great speaker are number one, having had whip experience. That's the term in Congress we use for getting the number of votes needed to pass a bill. The majority whip is actually the three position. Kevin was the whip at one point in time. That's what the name of the game is. You can have as good an idea as you want, but if you don't have the votes, it doesn't really matter. And so I think the best speakers are really good at knowing their colleagues, knowing where the votes are on any given issue, and getting 218, which is that magic number in the House, a simple majority. If you have 218 votes, you can do almost anything you want. If you don't have 218, it's hard to do much of anything. And the second thing I think the speaker really needs to handle is the appropriations, the spending. That's the main power of Congress. Article 1 vests the power of the purse. You've heard that phrase, right? With the Congress, we get to spend the money that taxpayer dollars come in and choose to where that goes and what the priorities are. And every year, that's where the rubber meets the road on government funding bills, on these supplemental bills. President Trump's now pushing, a supplemental spending package. If you really understand the budget, where the bodies are buried, so to speak, that's a great way you can wield power. And I think the best speakers kind of marry those two up, in my experience.
Yeah. So I want to put you on the spot here. I don't know if this is okay, but who do you think who do you think was the most effective Speaker of the House since the year of 2000? Who would you say?
I got to say, Kevin. Kevin's number one in my book, obviously. And truly, I think
who's number two?
That's a great question. I will give it to. It's hard for me to admit this, but I respect the way Nancy Pelosi wielded her power. I really do.
Yeah.
And so I don't like the things she did. I was not a fan of, Obamacare and a lot of the policies she pushed, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which is broad inflation. But they are, Democrats, give them credit, they are shameless when it comes to wielding power, whipping votes. Those two characteristics I mentioned, she was a whip, she was an appropriator. And so, again, while I didn't see eye to eye with her on a lot of things, I have to tip my cap and respect how she wielded it. And then I think we'll adjust 2 years down. 1998, Newt Gingrich was also, I think, a really great speaker.
Yeah.
He had that vision. That's probably the third trait, I would say. The two I just talked about are more tactical, but having the vision, Republicans were in the minority for 40 years. And Newt Gingrich did the Contract with America, did something that no one thought could be done, which was take back the House from Democrats. When you have a speaker that has the vision as well as the tactical knowledge of how the House works, the process, the policy, that's a pretty formidable combo. And so I'll give Newt a shout out, and very reluctantly, against my Republican instincts, I'll give Nancy Pelosi a shout out for how she wielded the gavel.
I love it. No, I appreciate you being honest about that. So I know you get into it in your book. So what do you think is the biggest lesson that America can learn in regards to what happened with Kevin in his time as speaker and how it ended? What would you say is the biggest lesson there?
Yeah. Well, if you're not a fan of that, which again, I found only a poll that said only 1/4 of Republicans were in favor of that move, it's on us in some ways, right? To take accountability as the electorate. If we don't like what we're getting out of our government, it's on us to elect better leaders. I have a saying in the book that the quality of decisions our government makes is directly tied to the quality of individuals making those decisions. And you've seen what happens when we can put transformational leaders in power, things can happen. But when you have folks that, again, are beholden to one class or another, or not beholden to the voters, that's where you get the stagnation. And so I'd put the onus back on the voters, on the American people, to demand more of our representatives, demand people that are going to go to Washington and actually change things, put in the work to change things. I tell a story in the book. There's a Democrat. I'm giving too many shout outs to Democrats in this show. I don't know what's going on, but Marcy Kaptur is the longest serving female in Congress. And she had to take 3 different Congresses, 6 years, to pass a law to construct the World War II memorial in Washington, D.C. on the National Mall. Think about that. That's probably the easiest slam dunk, 100% public approval to honor the greatest generation. And it took one representative 6 years to get that done. That's how the Congress works. And again, I can say that having been on the front lines, I write about it in the book a lot, but sometimes change comes quickly, but other times it takes dogged persistence. And we need to expect that of our representatives. Don't fall for the guys that say this is going to happen overnight. You got to have folks that are willing to put in the work and the know how to get things done.
Yeah, this kind of leads me to this question because we try to be as fair as we practically can. I mean, I wasn't in the room, so I can only base things as an outsider. But do you think the founding fathers knew that Congress would move as slow as they do, and that's okay? Like, do you think maybe we have a misplaced expectation of Congress? I'm just kind of exploring this because every day we get a reminder of, okay, this is why I don't like Congress, or here we go again. They didn't do this.
Yeah.
But do you think the founding fathers knew that this is just the way it's going to be? I mean, what is your take on that?
Yeah, it's great to think about, especially with 250th birthday coming up, right? I've been thinking about these questions myself and researching for the book. I do think the founders expected there to be give and take and compromise, right? I don't think that's as dirty a word as it's made out to be. The Constitution itself was a compromise between the large states and the small states, right? But I don't think the founders would have recognized with the Congress today is that it has willingly given up so much of its power to the executive branch. You ask about great speakers, the speakers have done what they can do, but honestly, the presidency has become so powerful and has gotten so much, bigger in terms of its staff and its budget and its resources. I don't think the founders envisioned that happening. And a lot of that has been willingly because members, I think by and large, not by and large, but a lot of them are motivated by returning to Congress, and making hard decisions honestly makes returning to Congress more difficult, right? If you make a hard decision, it means you're going to make some people happy, but other people unhappy. And so rather than make those hard calls, Congress has deferred, for example, war powers to the administration. A lot of spending authority has gone to the administration. That's what I don't think the founders would have envisioned. The deliberate nature of our government, I think they'd be okay with. I like that we don't swing too wildly back and forth. That said, I would be open to some more, votes on the record. I'm actually someone, and Kevin was someone that came out and said we should do away with the filibuster. If nothing else, at least on spending bills, those appropriation bills I mentioned earlier in the show, because that's where the rubber meets the road. And I think, you know what, it's a lot harder to get the majority than people think. I'd rather have members have to go out there, defend their position, debate the issues, vote on it, rather than, campaign on these Green New Deal ideas that they know they're never going to have to actually take a vote on. So it leads voters to think something more can happen than might happen. I'm okay with getting rid of, some of these guardrails that have slowed us down needlessly. I don't mind give and take. I don't mind compromise. I don't mind deliberation. But I'd rather have the Congress, again, reclaim some of that authority and actually debate these issues and let the American people weigh in and decide and show us the way.
No, that that's really good because right now we're experiencing that in the Senate. The Save America Act. It hasn't. I don't think they even. I don't. I'm not too sure they actually did a vote yet. I might be wrong. They probably did, but the essential statement or status right now, according to Leader Thune, is he does not have the votes. That's been his main thing. He's gone back to time and time again. The math isn't there, and so like if you're an American out there and you're like, yeah, the Save America Act, 90-10% issue. It's pretty simple. Everybody can get on board. How do you explain his explanation of not having the math? What does that say in particular to what's happening in the Senate?
Yeah. Well, I know there's been a couple different versions. I'm a House guy, and the House has passed the Save America Act, I
Right.
think, 3 different times. The Senate does have that 60 vote threshold, right? And so I get there's not the Democrats on that. I'd be interested in seeing a vote on just, sometimes if you don't have the votes for the whole package, you break it down into smaller packages.
Mm.
And so let's start with that voter ID, right? We've had Democrats like John Fetterman say, I'm for that. Let's try that straight up or down. And again, as I said, I don't mind having the debate over a couple weeks, and the American people will show us the way. That's how something
Right.
like the Civil Rights Act got passed, right? It was being filibustered, and eventually it got covered. It got covered on shows like, yours back in the day, what that would have looked like, and the news and everything else. And everyone finally weighed in and said, why are you holding this up? And it got
Right.
through. So I don't mind forcing the issue on certain votes. Again, I think they might have more success if they did it in smaller subsections, right? Let's start with just voter ID. That'd be a huge win if we could get that across our nation.
Yeah. Yeah, you're talking about something I've always brought up. I don't understand why they just don't do single subject bills. It just seems like a much easier thing to just either find the compromise or give and take on because we're just talking about this one issue, not 10 different issues, and
Yeah.
we all have to agree on it. Yeah, that's the common sense I think Americans get really frustrated at if we're looking at the tactical side. Why do you think they're so hesitant or they refuse to do single bills? What do you think is the behind that? What is the incentive, I guess, for them not to do that?
Yeah. Well, part of it is how do you get the votes, right? And
Mhm.
so, for example, the farm bill is kind of the classic
Right.
case where, there's agriculture subsidies for our farmers, but then also kind of, food stamps and welfare benefits for the cities. And that's always been the marriage where you have Republicans, Democrats, and, urban and rural voters voting for their constituencies. On their own, those two issues might only have 150 votes. But when you put it together, now you have the 218 or the 60 you need. So that's generally where some of that stuff has come from. The Save America Act, I think, is something different where, it's so good on paper that other people want to attach their ideas to it. And so that's, in this case, actually, it's some of the conservatives that have gone against single subject, because single subject, in my eyes, would just be voter ID. That's a bill, right? Election day voting only. That's a bill, right? We could have 3 or 4 different bills. In this case, it's actually grown, and now they have, no transgender athletes in sports, all these things which I support. But in a weird sort of way, it's actually been the conservatives on this one that have bundled a lot into a bill where, again, as a whole, you could say this is all about saving America, but a true single subject nature would look at these on a more discrete level. And so it goes both ways. Some ways it's trying to get the votes. Other ways it's when people see a train that's moving and the president's behind it. Now they say, oh, by the way, my priority should get attached to it as well, because they want to get, something signed into law. So it can cut both ways.
You know, give me some rope, but I do find this to be funny. That reminds me of the high speed rail to nowhere in California.
Wow.
When they announced that you had all these people that jumped on it, and then then these mayors wanted it to go through theirs, it just slowed the whole thing down.
What a
Um,
mess. What a mess.
yeah,
And Kevin fought against that every step of the way. And then his successor, Vince Fong, who was in the Congress or the state assembly, he fought against it. I mean, we saw that for what it was. That was a true boondoggle. California, we could spend a long time talking about
right.
California, but
Yeah.
that was a big problem.
Yeah. I often tell people that California should be used as a case study on policy, because you can have great intentions, but there's a difference between intentions and actual outcomes. And I mean, it's clear as day in what's happening in California.
Well, and
Yeah, go ahead.
I work in DC now, and I've actually joked. You talked about what the founders would be surprised or recognize about our system today. I think they would definitely be surprised at the boom of the bureaucracy.
Right.
And I've joked that I want all voters to sit through one of these, you know, Endangered Species Act lawyer briefings I have to go through, and all these things to do anything in this country, to build anything, to open a business. I mean, the amount of red tape you have to cut through. I want everyone to sit through one of those briefings before they vote and say, do I want more of this or less of this?
Right.
Because you'd be surprised how much government you'll never miss.
Yeah. So, given this book, you have the words, because I love the meanings of words. I like to make time for them: glory, grief, and the gavel. Tell me what the glory part is all about.
Yeah. So the glory was, you know, the simple answer is the days we won, right? When Kevin was elected speaker, the first 2 words I said to him were the words I've been waiting to say since I was an intern, Mr. Speaker, right? That is a moment I will never forget. Being on the floor with him and our team and the members celebrating. That is some of the commonly thought of glory. I also, derived a lot of glory, I think, from the work we did. I was so fortunate that we had such a great team. And I feel like when I left government, obviously there's a lot of things we wish we could have gotten done, but I feel like we made a real difference in people's lives. And hearing that feedback from the folks out in the country and seeing that impact, that was, I think, glory in my eyes, and giving, glory to God, right? Grief, there are a lot of moments in this town. If you expect just to win every day, don't get into politics, right? We had a lot of down days as well. It was tough to revisit some of those episodes in writing this book. The first run for speaker that didn't go as well, that was tough. But you learn from that, and not in the moment, but in the rearview mirror, you look back, and I think you're also grateful for those challenges that life threw at you. And we grew, we learned from that. You can't have ups without the downs, and so there was certainly a lot of moments of grief. Um, the removal was tough for me as well. That was almost like a death in the family. Um, but I wanted this to be human. I did not want this to be the Disney version of everything's perfect and uh, all everyone lived happily ever after. It's a messy business. It's a tough business, but it is a rewarding business, and that's why people get in it to make a difference. And so I hope I show both sides of what that life is like for someone as a staffer on Capitol Hill.
Yeah. I was saying this today because I'm sure you know how loud the internet can be today on all things politics. And I was basically telling people that it's messy. There's no doubt about it. It can be toxic. It could be frustrating. It could be deflating. But this is, in a sense, what the trade-off is when you have a constitutional republic, a limited democracy. If you had
Yeah.
communism, yeah, we may not have any of this, but you may not even be alive. They may have, stolen your organs or put you in a camp. So,
Exactly.
we've got to understand as Americans the trade-off of what our founding fathers came up with. And if we understand it, I think it'll be easier to reason with. And the reason why I bring that up is because you mentioned something earlier about governing or governing, um, a small percentage of the population or a minority, even in Congress. Could you explain that dynamic? Like, how does the speaker decide how to how to essentially support bills that may be catering to a small percentage of people, whether that small
Mm.
percentage of members of Congress or small percentage of the population? And how do they balance that in a way that's like, hey, we're not going to do this at the expense of the majority, if that makes sense?
Mhm, mhm. Well, first, let me pick up on your first point, which is right. We have, and I think Churchill is saying, Americans will always do the right thing after exhausting all other options. Right? It is the worst system in the world, except for all the others. Right? So it's messy. We showed that in our fight that I write about in the book. But I don't think anyone born in the world today, if you could ask them, where do you want to live? It's here. Right? They don't want to live in China, where if you get to a certain level of success, your knees are going to be cut out from underneath you. Metaphorically speaking, but maybe literally as well. And when you were at the beholden of one person making a decision, if that decision's right, great. But if the decision's wrong, like when you did zero COVID and people can leave their houses for multiple years, I'd rather have a democracy where we can express our voice and say this has gone too far. On your second question of how does the speaker kind of determine what bills come to the floor and who they listen to, um, individual members do have a tremendous amount of power in the House, especially these days with the slim majorities. So there's 435 members in the House of Representatives. And these days, honestly, there's about 210 seats that are firmly Republican and 210 seats that are firmly Democrat almost every year. So that's only 15 or so swing seats that make up the majority. And so whether you're a majority maker who comes from a very kind of centrist district, or you're one of the far right or left members, the speaker has to cater to you at any given day of the week, because you can hold up progress on the floor if you withhold your vote. And so it's kind of a constant give and take. Again, I think there's always priorities that folks, unify around. Kevin, when he ran for speaker, put together what was called the Commitment to America. It echoed Speaker Gingrich's contract with America. It had our promises to, make an economy that was strong, a nation that's safe, a future that's built on freedom, and a government that's accountable. We talked about border security in there. We passed HR 2, which was the strongest border security bill in history. We passed HR 5, which was the Parents' Bill of Rights. When you hear those numbers, HR 1, 2, 3, that denotes like the number priority it is in that Congress. We enacted a huge deficit reduction bill with Joe Biden in office. That was not easy to do. So you have some of those marquee bills, right, that folks work around. That was obviously the reconciliation bill this year, the One Big Beautiful Bill. But outside of that, there's dozens of bills that get passed every week. And so a lot of those do have bipartisan support, you don't hear about, but they pass pretty smoothly. The rest of those, the speaker looks to the committee chairs and sees what has passed and what do we think can pass on the floor. Does it have votes from, all parts of the conference? And hopefully will help, the American people in some way. And that's usually how we go about picking what bills come to the floor.
Yeah, that's really good because um, I also made this point today that it's our country and we should behave that way. So just because Congress may be moving slow, just because they may have low approval rating at this moment, maybe people have gone sour on them. What about your city? What about your state? There's so much work there that don't get you know all down and out because of what's happening in DC, which is a whole nother animal than what's happening in LA or any other city out there in America. Do you find that to be a reality as well, given your time on Capitol Hill? Do you find that sometimes what's happened on Capitol Hill is not actually reality in other parts of the country? Do you find that to be true?
Yes, 100%, 100%, and some of it is performative, in DC, right? The cameras point at the member, they make their speech. What the camera doesn't show you is afterwards, they go over and they might see their Republican or Democrat colleague, and give them a handshake or a hug, slap them on the back. How's your wife doing? How's your kids doing? And just 2 minutes ago, you thought they were the most bitter enemies. So some of this is designed to excite and rile up. I think it's almost become a sport, right? That folks watch. I don't think that's healthy per se, but I do think what you talked about is right. If you want to make a big impact, the local level is the best place to do that. My mom served on our school board when we were growing up. My dad is currently an alderman in our city council. They have decisions that cross their desk every day, and they make an impact. Right, putting that stop sign near the crossing by the playground, right? That actually has an impact in the day-to-day lives of the community. And so I would encourage folks to get involved. Obviously, watching your show and taking in current events is one great way to do that. But let's go beyond that, right? Help out on a campaign, study your issues, volunteer, knock doors, sign up for a committee or a commission your town needs to, help run the local affairs. Those are things that I really find do have an impact. And like you said, when you do a couple of those, you realize that things aren't so bad in this country. And I don't think we're as divided as the media wants to make us, the mainstream media at least.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think so. I think social media really amplifies a lot of it. Um, and I think that sometimes the small percentage of the country has like the loudest voice because of social media or mainstream media.
Yeah.
And so, if there's anything you could tell Americans out there who feel, you know, cost of living still high. The economy still isn't where we want it to be. What's going on? They feel all this negativity. What would you tell them? Because you were on Capitol Hill, so you already know what the game is. What would you say to them?
Yeah. I would say there are a lot of really great people up there doing the best they can every single day. And again, our process is slow and messy sometimes, but you don't see and read about necessarily the members or the staffers. I mean, people have told me this was a risk for me putting myself out there in this way, writing this book. But I wanted to show that there are good people up on the Hill doing good work every day. My wife is on the Hill. She's carrying that torch of public service in the Leganski family. And I wanted to let viewers know that you'll read about some of the characters in this book who are doing good things in their own unique ways, right? But there are good people up there. They need reinforcements. So that's my call to folks out there is to get involved. If you got a good legislator, support them, go out and help them. And if you got one, and the American people are so smart, they know when someone's feeding them a line of BS. If you got one that's not in it for the right reasons and is more focused on, getting too many clicks and views and not actually getting progress done, like you said, on those issues that matter, then you got to vote them out and you got to have that, BS meter. And I think Americans really do. As I mentioned, a lot of those folks that voted out Kevin, they're not going to be in Congress anymore. So the American people are wiser than I think we give them credit for. But it does take us all getting involved. And, today's a primary day in my home state of Maryland. I just voted before this show. I don't know how many of my neighbors did, though. Those primary elections really, really matter because that's who, decides who's going to be on the ballot in November. A lot of people vote in November. A lot of people don't vote in June. And so all those levels, they really, really matter. And representatives, they hear you. They respond when constituents are, A, voting a certain way, or B, calling in, weighing in on certain issues. It's just on us to, take a little bit more responsibility as well, and demand more of our representatives, which I think, again, your show does a great job of encouraging.
I appreciate that. Final thing here. This is more kind of a little a series of questions. Term limits. Do you think that should exist for Congress?
We have term limits on the Republican side for chairman, and I think that's great, right? Because we've gotten to circle through a lot of good talent. Meanwhile, on the Democrat side, you've had Maxine Waters, who's pushing, I think she's over 80. Jerry Nadler was in that role for many, many years. The list goes on and on and on. I'd be fine with term limits on some level. On the flip side, you do need the experience. And again, I know term limits are a very popular, probably 80-20 issue, but I mean, you tell me, right? How long did it take you till you got good at your craft, right? It probably
Mm.
takes a number of years. Any athlete, any professional, any businessman, those first couple of years, you're just trying to figure it out and figure out, where the bathrooms are and what's up, what's down. And so I'd want it to be something reasonable. I don't think I'd almost be more in favor of an age limit, right? If you can't use an iPhone, I don't think you can represent 700,000 constituents back in your district. Um,
Yeah. No,
But
I
I do
totally
think you
understand.
need some experience, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I've seen stories where some members were in uh, home care or something like that, or they weren't able to physically be on. I totally get you on the age limit thing. Um,
Yeah.
what about um, insider trading? It's legal, but would you support banning the? I guess their ability, whether it's their family, their initial family, right, spouses,
Mhm.
their ability to trade stocks, or do you think they should be allowed to?
Yeah, I don't understand the folks that are actively trading stocks on a day-to-day basis. I mean, even if you're doing it innocently, the optics are just so bad. And so Kevin
Mhm.
made that pledge as speaker that he was not going to trade stocks. He did not come from means by any stretch. Um, if there's folks out there that want to have something in a mutual fund that just kind of runs fine, or some ETFs or things like that, they're not managing on a day-to-day basis, a blind trust. I think there's lots of methods that you can go about. I had to report all of my assets again, very meager, humble assets, but I had
Mhm.
some mutual funds, and every month I had to report it. I just didn't trade those. I bought, a couple and would put some extra money into the stocks when I had it. And I just wanted to stay out of trouble that way. I didn't want to, get anywhere near that line of what is public information, what is not public information. And so again, I mean, there's laws in the books. The optics of it, though, just do contribute to that general pessimism about Congress. And so I'd love to see something done where, again, I don't want it to just be rich people or poor people in Congress, right? Because then you have misaligned incentives. If people are just doing it to get rich or who are already rich,
Right.
that's not really in touch with the needs. But there should be a way where we can kind of draw a line here in a wall between church and state where there's not that view of impropriety. And Speaker Pelosi, even though she was a good speaker at wielding power, I think she is hugely to blame for this. And what
Oh
her
yeah.
and her husband did over her tenure in Congress was just beyond the pale, right? And so that has left a pall over all of us. And she never really had to answer for her actions.
Yeah. Not I'm definitely with, most Americans are definitely with you on that. The other one was so when it comes to members of Congress resigning, think of Eric Swalwell, Tony Gonzalez. Should members of Congress be allowed to resign without actually getting the ethics investigation completed? Because the optics were essentially, we're going to investigate you, but then you resign,
Mhm,
so now we're not going to
mhm,
investigate you, and
mhm,
you can still draw from
mhm,
your benefits, etc. Do you think that
mhm.
should change, or what are we missing here?
Yeah, well, yeah, I guess the line of argument is, once the member is no longer a member of Congress, then the House Ethics Committee doesn't have jurisdiction over that person. Okay, fine. But I'm kind of with you, right? I don't think that and Matt Gaetz did the same thing. He tried to leave early so the ethics report wouldn't come out against him. I think if it starts, it should finish, right? And
Mhm.
so, however that wraps up, um, I'm glad those members that did bad things are no longer in office, but you should not be free from the scrutiny that comes with it. And back in the old days, again, it didn't even get to this point. If there was even an ethics complaint against you so serious, the member would accept it up front before that ethics process began and just leave then. But we've spent time and resources and taxpayer dollars investigating these items, finding the facts, and so I think if that's all gone forward, it's right that public who paid for those investigations should at least see the results, even if it's preliminary.
Yeah. Final one for you, and this one was definitely a big one this year. Congressional maps. So,
Yeah,
would you support hitting like the reset button because of all the gerrymandering that has occurred at this point?
100%.
Yeah.
100%, man. I grew up in Chicago. I think Jersey's credited with pioneering it, but Chicago and Illinois is got to be one of the worst, right? And so when I grew up, we had a Republican in our neighborhood, in our town, in Congress. They did away with that real quickly. That I think is the single biggest way you could change Congress is if you had a true. Obviously, it's hard to get somebody that's honest and unbiased and fair, but if you could put the districts such that they are as representative as possible of our country, right? So they have rich and poor people. They've got people of all background. They've got people that work in all different fields. That would, I think, really do the most to impact the House. And so, yes, if there's someone that is completely impartial and could do it in a way where we have, I mean, again, some of these northeastern states, there's Republicans everywhere. You drive through these states, there's Republican voters and signs, Trump signs up, and they have no members elected at the congressional level. I'd be in favor of it again. If everyone did it across the board, yes, that'd be a huge positive for the House.
Yeah. Yeah. If only.
I know. One day.
Yeah, that would be amazing. I know I said final question, but I do think this at least deserves your take on it, and that has been the rise of this criticism of super PACs, particularly lobbies. Obviously, that's been nothing new. Foreign countries donating to politicians. Now there's this whole thing of if you're APAC, you're bad. Especially on the Democrat side, that has become a big thing. Even on the Republican side, there's been, particularly on the internet, pro-Israel, anti-Israel. So, what do you think would be a big step for Congress to make to at least repair some of the trust in that regard?
Yeah. I mean, I think transparency is the best answer, right? Now, money in politics, again, gets a lot of play. I've read, and fact check me on this, but that, we spend more as Americans on potato chips every year than we do on political advertising, right? And so, in context here, um, it's somewhat of a drop in the bucket. That said, it does have an impact, right? If there's ads running your district, billboards up, you see that, members of your community see that. I'm not going to say it doesn't have an impact. It definitely does. But I think transparency and sunlight is the best disinfectant. Let's understand where this money's coming from. It's coming from foreign countries. It was kind of like what they did on X. It sort of went away, but let's see where all these people are posting from. And if all these
Right.
accounts that are saying America's so bad are from China or Iran, we can see through that. Americans get that pretty simply. So I'd be more in favor, instead of these, you know, kind of disclaimers at the end. This is paid for by America's Great Pack. Let's have a little more transparency on who's funding these things, and then folks, I think, will be able to sniff out, what the
Yeah.
true motivation is.
Because basically the Supreme Court has already ruled Citizens United that organizations and such can donate large amounts of money. I'm kind of oversimplifying it, but the bottom line is, okay, well, if that ruling isn't going to change, then the next best option is just tell us where it comes from. Essentially, at
I,
least be honest
I think
about it. Is
so.
what you're saying.
Yeah, I think so. I think that would go a long way in folks understanding again who's pushing these messages.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, guys, this has been John Leganski. His book, Glory, Grief, and the Gavel. Please get a copy of it. That's what it looks like on screen. What's the subtitle there? An insider's look, or
An
excuse me, an
inside guide
inside
to running
guide. Yeah.
for
Go ahead.
Speaker of the House. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's available on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, your local bookstore, everywhere books are sold. Came out today, so you've got one of the first interviews, and I
I
appreciate you having
appreciate
me
that.
on for it.
Absolutely, John. So grateful to have you, and God bless you, and thank you so much.